I did not mean to end up at that cemetery. People always say that when something bad happens, like they need it on record, that they were not looking for trouble. In my case, it was true. I was 29, broke, sleeping badly, doing odd jobs for cash. And I took the work because the man who offered it had an envelope in his hand and did not waste my time pretending it would be good for me in some bigger sense. His name was Del Harmon. He ran a funeral home out on the edge of Bishop Lane, the kind of place with a low brick front, fake brass handles, and a sign that looked older than the building. I had helped him once before move folding chairs and wipe down a chapel after a service. This time he called and asked if I could clear brush and haul junk from an old cemetery his family trust had recently taken responsibility for. He said the county had been on him about code violations, fallen branches, a collapsed fence, loose stonework, beer cans, storm damage. He said it would be hot, dirty, and unpleasant. Then he said he would pay cash at the end of each day. That was enough. The cemetery sat a few miles outside town, beyond a stretch of road that got narrow and mean the farther you drove. Pines crowded both sides until the daylight itself looked smaller. There were no houses nearby, not even trailers. Just woods and ditches and a few broken mailboxes sunk in weeds. The entrance was marked by 2 stone posts with iron gates hanging crooked between them. One gate had slipped off the top hinge, so it leaned inward like it had tried to close and died halfway there. A weather-eaten sign said, "Black Ridge Cemetery." Under that, in smaller faded letters, "Established 1889. I parked my truck and looked through the gate. The place spread over a low rise under a cover of old trees. The ground was uneven, crowded with leaning markers, family plots boxed in by rusted iron, and patches of grass gone wild enough to hide a dog. It was bigger than I expected. What made it feel wrong was not the size. It was the sense that nobody had cared for it in a very long time, but someone had cared too much once. You could still see traces of it in the heavy stonework, the carved angels, the expensive monuments. Money had gone into the dead here. Serious money. Del met me at the gate wearing a dark short-sleeved shirt that stuck to his chest with sweat. He had a clipboard, work gloves tucked into his back pocket, and that funeral home face people in that business seemed to develop. Calm, practiced, tired around the edges. He showed me what he wanted done. Cut back brush along the south fence, stack broken limbs for pickup, clear vines off a retaining wall near the oldest section, gather trash, beer bottles, and anything else loose enough to carry. He had a little skid steer coming the next day, but for the first day, it was just handwork. Before he left, he gave me an odd warning. He said, "Stay out of the north corner if you can help it." I asked why. He looked up through the trees toward the far side of the cemetery. For a second, he had the expression of somebody deciding whether to say something stupid out loud. Then he said the ground is bad there. Soft in places. There was some washout after the rains. I asked if he meant sinkholes. He said, "Not exactly. Just don't go wandering over there unless you have to." Then he got in his car and left. I worked through the morning under a sun that never really got through the canopy. The air felt damp and used, like it had already been breathed by too many people. Gnats hovered around my face. I dragged limbs to the road, cut thorny vines off the fence, filled contractor bags with bottles and food wrappers and broken flower pots. Some of the graves were old enough that the names had gone soft and unreadable, but a lot were clear. What I noticed first was how many dates stopped young. 19, 23, 15, 31. There were children too, but not many. Most were adults. A lot of them had the little metal holders for flowers, but there were almost no fresh flowers. If people still came out there, it was not often. By early afternoon, I had worked farther in than I meant to. The cemetery sloped gently toward the north corner, where the older stones stood packed close together under thick cedar and oak. There was a low wall there, cracked and pushed open by roots. Beyond it stood a separate section I had not seen clearly from the road. The grass was shorter there, almost flattened, not maintained, just thin, as if it never grew right. I went over because I saw trash tangled in the wall and figured I may as well grab it. The temperature seemed to drop under those trees, though maybe that was my imagination. The air changed anyway. It smelled wrong. Not rot exactly. Wet earth, stone dust, something old and bitter under it. The graves in that section were different from the rest. Not older, though some were old. Not richer, just different. Many had taller markers, black granite or dark marble instead of pale limestone. Several had photographs set in oval frames. A few had little cast plaques with dates and family names. And on a surprising number of them, there was no cause of death listed, no message about beloved mother or devoted son. Instead, there were short lines etched beneath the names, taken in pieces, burned alive in the cellar, found in the creek with the hands removed, killed with his own knife. I stood there longer than I should have, reading them. Maybe it was a family tradition. Maybe somebody on a cemetery board years ago had allowed more personalized epitaphs than usual. Even then, the wording was strange, not sentimental, not softened, just blunt, like an inventory of damage. I found another. Ellen Voss, 34. Her jaw was broken before death. Then another. Patrick Gentry, 17. What was left was identified by his belt buckle. I did not like that section, but I kept reading. Morbid curiosity, that's simple. When the dead are safely dead, people can tolerate a lot. That is why true crime fills bookstores. That is why crowds gather at wrecks. Toward the back of the section stood a squat stone building half sunk into the rise. It was no bigger than a backyard shed, built of rough blocks with an iron door and a shallow pitched roof. I figured it was an old receiving vault. There had been one in another cemetery where I used to run with friends as a teenager, a place to keep bodies in winter when the ground was too hard to dig. The door on this one was open 6 inches. I told myself Dell had left it that way. I walked over and looked inside. The light dropped off fast. The room was narrow and mostly empty. Shelves of poured concrete lined the walls. Water stains ran down the back. There were no coffins, no tools, no stacks of lawn equipment like I half expected. Only a folding chair and a shovel propped in the corner. The shovel looked new. I backed away from the door. That was the moment I became aware of the sound that had been going on for a while without my noticing it. Not birds, not insects. A low mechanical hum, unsteady, like an old refrigerator cycling in another room. It seemed to come from underground. I moved around behind the vault and saw a heavy green cable running down the slope into brush, partly hidden under leaves. I followed it about 20 feet and found a little portable generator behind a screen of boxwood. It was running. That stopped me cold. A generator in a neglected cemetery, hidden in the brush, with a live cable feeding somewhere near an old vault. There are moments when common sense does not come as a clear thought. It arrives as pure body. Your shoulders tighten. The back of your neck goes alert. Your skin begins to feel the air too well. I turned the generator off. The silence after it cut out was immediate and ugly. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard somebody scream. It did not come from far away. It came from inside the hill, muffled enough that I could not make out words. It lasted only a second or two. A woman, I thought. Then a hard pounding, frantic and fast, as if fists were hitting wood or metal from a confined space. I stumbled backward and nearly went down on one knee. The pounding stopped. I stood there staring at the vault, waiting for another sound. Nothing. I yelled out, asking if somebody was in there. My voice sounded weak in that place. Still nothing. I should say here that I did not immediately run. This is the part people lie about after the fact. They make themselves decisive, brave or cowardly, but clear. I was neither. I was confused. I thought maybe there was some piece of equipment in the ground, some pump, some prank, some impossible thing that still had a normal explanation if I could just hold still long enough to find it. Then I looked back at the open vault door and saw scratch marks around the inside edge of the frame. Fresh ones, not rust, not old wear. Bright gouges through the paint, low near the latch side. I walked to the door and pulled it open the rest of the way. The hinges screamed. Inside, that same bitter smell was stronger. The room looked empty, but when I stepped in, I saw a seam in the floor under the folding chair. A rectangular panel of steel set into the concrete, maybe 5 feet by 3. With a recessed pull ring in one end. The cable from the generator ran into a hole drilled through the wall and disappeared below the panel. I put my hand on the steel. Cold. Then I heard it again. A voice this time. Weak, hoarse, directly below me. Please. Just that. I dropped to one knee and grabbed the ring. The panel was heavy, but it shifted. Beneath it was a narrow stairway dropping into a space lit by one naked work lamp. The smell hit me first. Blood, urine, damp concrete, old meat. Under that, bleach. At the bottom of the stairs was a room dug partly into the hill and reinforced with cinder block. There was a workbench along one wall, shelves along another, and a drain in the center of the floor. The woman was strapped to a chair near the bench. Her head was shaved in patches, her face swollen on one side. There was duct tape around one wrist where she had been partly cut loose and then retied. She had no shoes. Both feet were bloody. Her left big toenail was missing. The floor beneath her was dark where blood had dried and been rinsed and dried again. She looked up at me with an expression I still do not have a good name for. Not hope exactly. Hope requires the mind to still function like a normal mind. She looked like a cornered animal that had seen the trap open and could not decide whether that made the world safer or more dangerous. There was a dead man on the floor against the far wall. He was shirtless and had been opened from throat to lower belly. Not cleanly. It looked like somebody had started with a hunting knife and gotten impatient. The intestines had spilled partly out, and a layer of white powder had been dumped over the torso. Lime, maybe. Or powdered cleaner. I can still see the cuts around his mouth. Someone had slashed the corners wider, then packed dirt into them. I nearly blacked out. The woman made a noise and tried to speak. It snapped me back. I went to her, peeled tape from her mouth, and she coughed so hard I thought she would choke. "He went to get gas," she said. I asked who. She said, "Clyde. Please cut me loose. Please." My knife was in my truck. I looked around for something sharp and found box cutters on the bench, along with scissors, zip ties, pliers, a hacksaw, a tray of syringes, and a set of old Polaroid photos clipped to a string above the bench. I did not mean to look at the photos. I saw them anyway. One showed a man kneeling in a pit with his hands bound behind him, while someone outside the frame held his hair and pulled his face up. Another showed a woman lying on a concrete floor with one breast cut off. Another showed a teenage boy with his eyelids stapled open. There were more, dozens, all taken in this same room or a place like it. I cut the straps from the chair. The woman could not stand. Her ankles had been tied so tightly the skin had opened. I got one of her arms around my shoulders. She was light in the way very sick people are light. Like much of her had already gone somewhere else. We made it halfway up the stairs before a truck engine sounded outside. She went rigid against me. "He's back," she whispered. I got her down the stairs again, faster than I should have. My brain was empty except for the need to hide. There was nowhere good. The room was too small, too bare. I eased her behind the stairs where the angle made a little shadowed space beside stacked bins. Then I took the box cutter and stood by the wall, feeling ridiculous and doomed. Above us, the vault door scraped open. Footsteps crossed the concrete. Then the steel panel moved. He came down without caution, carrying a red gas can in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He was older than I expected. Late 50s, maybe. Big through the chest and stomach. Gray stubble, clean work boots, faded jeans. He wore a sheriff's department windbreaker zipped halfway up over a plain t-shirt. I noticed that jacket before I noticed his face. That is probably why I am alive. My mind stalled on the wrong detail. Sheriff's department. Real or stolen. Off-duty. A cop. The delay made me freeze instead of lunging. He got 3 steps into the room, saw the empty chair, and set the gas can down with shocking calm. He looked toward the bench, the photos, the floor, the cut straps. Then he turned his head slightly toward the stairs, not enough to give away that he had heard us breathing. He said, "You should have kept the generator running." I stepped out because hiding any longer had become stupid. He lifted the flashlight and pointed it at my face. He did not seem angry. Not yet. More annoyed, like a man whose workday had been interrupted by weather. I told him to move away from the stairs. He smiled, not wide. The kind of smile that does not use the eyes at all. "That's your best idea, son?" I told him there was a woman down here and I was taking her out. He said, "You already found one corpse. Is another going to surprise you?" Then he moved. Fast. Faster than a big man that age had any right to move. He rushed me up against the wall and jammed my wrist so hard the box cutter flew away. The flashlight hit my cheekbone. White light burst across my vision. I swung at him and landed something weak on his neck. He drove his forearm into my throat and started crushing. I remember the smell of gas from the can and the damp stink of his jacket. I remember his face close to mine, not excited, not wild, focused, working. The woman behind the stairs made a sound. He glanced toward it. That was enough. I shoved both thumbs into his eyes. One slipped off the brow. The other went in deep enough that he grunted and rocked back. I hit him with the flashlight, and this time the metal edge caught the side of his head. He stumbled into the bench. Tools clattered. I went for the box cutter, found it under my knee, and slashed at him blind. The blade opened his forearm. He snarled then, finally sounding human, and swung a hammer from the bench. It cracked against the block wall an inch from my ear. I ran for the stairs. The woman was trying to pull herself up. I grabbed her under the arms. We got to the top just as he hit the bottom step behind us. I kicked the steel panel down hard on his head. It did not close, but it bought a second. We staggered out of the vault into open air. My truck was 50 yards away beyond rows of graves. We were never going to make it at that pace. I half dragged and half carried her through the markers while behind us the panel banged open and his boots hit the vault floor. I was shouting for help even though there was nobody for miles. She kept losing strength, folding down at the knees. At one point I looked back and saw him coming between the stones with a revolver in his hand. That was when I made the decision I still hate myself for. I left her for a moment. I sat her behind a broad monument and told her not to move. Then I ran for my truck with every bit of speed I had. He fired once. The bullet smacked stone near my left shoulder. I got to the truck, fumbled the door open, and reached under the seat for the tire iron. I also grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course there was no signal. I turned to run back and saw him hauling her by the hair across the ground. I can hear that sound in my head better than her screaming. The scrape of her body moving over gravel and roots, her heels digging uselessly. He was dragging her toward the north section, gun still in one hand, as if this were something he had done many times and had no energy left to be dramatic about. I charged him with the tire iron. He fired again and missed, then swung the pistol at me. It caught my forehead and split the skin. I hit him in the knee. He buckled. The woman rolled free and crawled toward a grave curb. He fired a third time and she jerked once, then went still. I brought the tire iron down on his wrist. The revolver dropped into the grass. He tackled me. We went over a low stone border and into a plot full of sunken graves. My leg drove into one soft patch and sank to mid-calf. He landed on top of me and started choking again, both hands this time, his face red and wet around one eye. I hit him wherever I could. Shoulder, neck, temple. He was unbelievably strong. Then the ground under us gave way. Not like in a movie. No dramatic opening. Just a sudden collapse of rotten boards and packed soil. 1 second we were fighting on a grave. The next we dropped through into blackness and splintered wood. I landed on my back in foul wet dirt. Something broke under me with a popping crack that was not part of me. He hit lower down and swore. A smell burst up so violently I gagged. Not fresh decay. Worse in some ways. The sealed, sweet chemical reek of old buried flesh newly exposed after years in the ground. I had fallen into a coffin. Part of it anyway. The lid had caved in. My hand came down on soaked fabric and bone inside it. I scrambled away and felt a skull roll under my palm. He was still alive in the pit with me. It was maybe 6 feet deep, walls of mud and roots, one side broken into another old burial cavity. Coffin wood jutted out like rotten ribs. Daylight showed above as a pale, ragged square. He lunged first. I jammed the tire iron across his throat and we slammed into the side wall. Mud came down over us. He bit my hand. I screamed and drove the iron into his mouth. Teeth cracked. Blood sprayed warm across my face. He made a guttural choking sound, grabbed for the iron, and pushed me backward into the broken coffin. My shoulder went through decomposed wood and into something soft that should have been impossible after so many years. I came out covered in black slurry and strips of burial cloth. He looked half blind now, one eye swollen shut, blood running from his mouth onto his shirt. He kept coming. I found the revolver in the mud by accident. My hand closed over the grip. I shoved the barrel under his chin and fired. At that distance, there was no real bang in my memory, only impact. The top of his head hit the side wall. Blood and gray matter sprayed the roots. His body convulsed once and fell over me. The weight pinned me against the ruined coffin and the body inside it. I lay there under him, under the dead he had landed me among, and for a while I could not move at all. When I finally dragged myself out of the grave, I vomited twice beside the marker. The woman was dead. The bullet had gone into her upper chest. Her eyes were open and fixed on nothing. I had never even asked her name. I tried my phone again. One bar appeared, then vanished. I climbed onto the hood of my truck and held the phone over my head until the call went through to 911. I was screaming by then. Not words at first, just noise. They found me sitting against my front tire with the revolver in my lap because I had become convinced if I put it down, something else would happen before help got there. The deputies who responded were not from our county. State police came too. Then detectives. Then men in plain clothes who never gave names. They bagged the underground room. They photographed everything. They took Clyde's body from the grave where he fell. They took the woman. They took the dead man from the basement, and several boxes of bones and teeth from shelves I had not noticed in my first panic. They also took my statement 5 different times. That first night at the hospital, a deputy sat outside my room. I noticed he never came all the way in. Maybe he did not want to look at me. I had dirt under my skin, cuts on my face, a bruised throat, cracked ribs, and old God knows what ground into my clothes from that grave. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photographs hanging over the bench. By the next day, the story had already shifted in town. That happens fast. Facts go in one end, and rumor comes out the other with new teeth. Some people said Clyde was a retired deputy who had gone off the rails after his wife died. Some said he had never really retired and still did favors for people. Some said he had been collecting drifters for years. Some said the woman he shot was his own niece. Nobody knew. And if they did know, they were not telling it to me. The official version, as far as they would share it, was that Clyde Haskell had kidnapped at least 3 people over a period of months, maybe longer. The underground room was called a private storage space on paper. He had access to the cemetery through a caretaker arrangement going back years. The old receiving vault had never been fully documented after the records office fire in the 90s. The generator, wiring, and panel were recent additions. The photographs were evidence of torture and homicide. Several people in the photos had already been identified from missing persons cases in neighboring counties. What they would not explain was the cemetery itself. A detective asked if I had read any of the epitaphs in the north section before I found the room. I said yes. He asked how many. I said enough to notice a pattern. He stared at me for a long moment and then wrote something down. I asked him what the pattern meant. He said old families have old habits. That was all. Del Harmon came to see me on the second day. He looked worse than I did, in a cleaner way, ashen, sweating through his shirt. His eyes kept going to the bruises on my throat, and then away. He brought me a change of clothes and my wallet, both recovered from my truck. He also brought an envelope with more cash than he had promised. I asked him if he knew about Clyde. He said he knew Clyde had keys and sometimes mowed the road entrance. He knew he drank, knew he had a temper, did not know about the room, did not know about the people. I asked him about the north section. He rubbed his face hard, fingers pressing over closed eyes. Then he said Blackridge used to be private. A family cemetery at first, then a closed burial ground for a handful of connected families. Not church people. Not in the usual sense. Wealthy landowners, timbermen, a judge, a doctor, men who ran things in that county before the highways came through and diluted it all. The north section was where certain members were buried, the ones who died badly. I said lots of people die badly. He nodded. This was different, he said. They believed some deaths left a mark, not just on the dead, but on a place. They thought violent ends had force to them, a residue. The worse the death, the stronger it stayed. They kept those burials together because they believed the dead would keep to one another there. I asked who believed that. The families? Some cult? He said he did not know what you call a cult when it has deeds and law licenses and 2 centuries of local history behind it. Then he told me something I wish he had said the first morning. The phrases on the gravestones were not epitaphs chosen by grieving relatives. They were conditions for burial. Whoever oversaw the cemetery required the manner of death to be stated plainly for the people interred in that section. Why? He gave a helpless little shake of the head. Because names weren't enough. That answer sat in me like a stone. He leaned closer then and lowered his voice even though we were alone. He said there had always been stories about caretakers using the place for private business. Not grave robbing, not exactly. More like feeding it. That was his word. Feeding. He said his grandfather used to joke that Blackridge never stayed full unless somebody kept adding to the list. I said that was not a joke. He looked ashamed. No, he said. I guess it wasn't. A week after I got out of the hospital, I tried to leave town for a while. I drove 2 states over to stay with my sister. I lasted 3 nights. Sleep was almost impossible. When I did sleep, I dreamed in confined spaces, wet dirt against my face, thin screaming through metal, hands reaching up through caved boards. Once I dreamed I was still in the underground room, but it was larger than it should have been, stretching under the whole hill in a chain of lit chambers, everyone occupied. I also became convinced, without any real proof, that someone was watching my sister's house from the road. You can say trauma does that to a person, and you would not be wrong. Trauma tunes the body to signals whether they are there or not. But there was a truck parked at the end of the lane 2 evenings in a row. Same shape, same dark body. Gone when I tried to get a plate number. My sister had kids. I did not want whatever this was near them. so I came back. By then, Blackridge had been taped off and was technically under state control, but the attention was already fading. News gets bored. A monster with a basement is worth a week if the photos are bad enough. After that, people move on to weather and politics and school board fights. I could not move on because the detective called and asked if I would come in to look at some photographs. Not the Polaroids from the room. Newer ones. Evidence photographs from a storage unit leased under Clyde's name 3 towns over. I said yes before I thought about what that would mean. The storage unit held tools, lime, plastic sheeting, old newspaper bundles, women's shoes, wallets, driver's licenses, and 6 cardboard banker boxes full of records. Not journals in the usual sense, ledgers, dates, initials, descriptions, short lines written in block letters, each entry no more than a sentence. Brought in from river turnout. Broke 2 fingers during loading. Would not answer. Removed 3 nails. Heart stopped during burn. Transferred remains to North Plot after dark. The detective let me read only a few pages before taking them back. He said there was an ongoing investigation, and I did not need the details. I said I had almost been killed, and I did need the details. He ignored that. Then he showed me a map of Blackridge with colored pins marking graves in the north section. Roughly half were now suspected to contain remains of people who were not the individuals named on the stones. Some of the original burials were there, he said. Historical deaths. Murders, accidents, suicides, lynchings, domestic killings, industrial incidents, missing persons who later turned up in pieces. But over time, especially in the last 30 years, newer bodies had been added illegally to existing family plots. Sometimes dismembered, sometimes burned, sometimes with acid damage that suggested the killer had tried to erase identity before burial. Clyde did not start it. That was the part he said very quietly. He thinks others came before him. He said he knew others came before him. How? Because some of the suspected illegal interments predated Clyde's employment at the cemetery by decades, and because the ledgers referenced names he had not invented. Caretakers, deputies, a county coroner, one former judge, men dead a long time, but not before they could have taught him a system. That should have made it feel historical, and therefore less immediate. Instead, it made the whole thing worse. One man in a hole can be understood. A series of men, working across years, using the same cemetery and the same logic, means the horror was not a rupture. It was continuity. I asked the detective why nobody had ever noticed bodies being added. He gave me a look I still remember. It was not pity. More like exhaustion. People notice, he said. Then they decide what noticing is worth. Over the next month, they exhumed graves. Not all. As many as they could justify. Blackridge sat under floodlights some nights while workers in protective suits opened plots and screened soil. The road filled with state trucks, media vans, and locals pretending not to stare. Names came out in waves. Some matched missing person cases. Some did not. Some were bones only. Others were old enough that the coffin hardware had fused with the dirt. A lot of families hired lawyers. A lot of records went missing. One county clerk resigned. A retired deputy shot himself in his garage. A former mortuary assistant left town overnight. It was one of those situations where the edges of the thing kept widening no matter where you drew the line. Every time someone asked how far it went, the safest answer seemed to be farther than that. I tried to stay out of it. I picked up work where I could, kept my head down, drank too much for a while, then stopped because the dreams got meaner when I drank. People in town knew what happened to me, but the way they looked at me shifted, depending on who they were. Some treated me like a victim, some like a witness they hoped would keep his mouth shut. A few acted like I had dragged something private into the daylight, and they resented the mess. One afternoon I came out of a hardware store and found an envelope under my windshield wiper. No stamp, no name. Inside was one Polaroid. It showed the underground room at Black Ridge before the shelves were emptied. On the back, in blue ink, was written, "You opened the wrong door." I went to the police. They took the photo, asked questions, and promised patrols. Nothing came of it. 2 nights later, someone killed Del Harmon. He was found in the preparation room of his funeral home. The front door had been locked. No sign of forced entry. He had been laid out on one of his own tables, with his throat opened from ear to ear. His hands were missing. They were later found in the flower cooler arranged around a vase of white lilies. The papers called it a possible retaliatory killing connected to the Black Ridge investigation. That wording is almost funny now. Possible. As if there were serious alternative theories. I went to his funeral because I could not stop thinking about him warning me away from the north corner without warning me enough. The service was crowded but tense. Men in pressed shirts stood with their families and kept their eyes on the floor. Nobody said much after the graveside prayer. The kind of silence there was not grief alone. It was calculation. Afterward, in the parking lot, a woman I did not know came up to me and said if I wanted the truth, I should stop talking to the police and start reading the names in the old section. Then she got in a car and left. I should have ignored her. I knew that even then. But people who survive one terrible event often make a strange mistake after. They think because they got through it once, they have some altered relationship to danger now. Like the rules have shifted. Like perhaps the thing chose them, and therefore they are already involved past the point of sensible retreat. So I went back to Black Ridge. It was officially closed, but a torn section of fence near the tree line made entry easy. The state had removed the tape after the last exhumation crew left. The cemetery looked worse than before. Disturbed ground everywhere. Open dirt scars where plots had been filled back in. Several stones laid aside for testing. The old vault was locked with a steel plate welded across the door. I did not go near it. I went to the north section and started reading names. The idea sounded absurd, but I had nothing else. I wrote them down in a notebook. Name, date, manner of death. Some were from the 1890s, some from the 20s, 30s, 50s. The deaths were as ugly as I remembered. Scalded and left in the tub. Dismembered with a corn knife. Dragged behind the mule until the head came off. Locked in the smokehouse. Skinned at the wrists first. A lot of them involved family. Husbands, sons, brothers, hired men. A surprising number involved local officials. One was the county prosecutor, 1911. Crushed slowly beneath farm machinery while still conscious. It was not random. That was what emerged after hours of looking. The names repeated across generations. Haskell, Voss, Gentry, Rook, Hale, Brannan, Saylor. Families tied to timber rights, mills, county offices, contracting. Some had thinned out or moved away. Some still ran businesses in town under cleaner names. And buried among the dead with horrible ends were a few people who had not died that way at all, if the public records were to be believed. I learned that because I started checking courthouse archives and old newspapers. Officially, Marion Hale died of influenza. Her stone at Black Ridge said her lungs were packed with dirt by hand. Officially, Judge Ezra Voss suffered a fall from his horse. His stone said the vertebrae were snapped one by one. Officially, Thomas Brannan drowned while fishing alone. His stone said the body floated because the gut had been slit open. Someone had corrected the record in stone. I do not know why that frightened me more than the basement room, but it did. A hidden murder is one kind of evil. A murder publicly described in a place only certain people read is another. That means the truth was not buried. It was preserved for insiders. I found the woman who had spoken to me in the parking lot by asking around quietly and pretending it was about funeral arrangements. Her name was Ruth Saylor, 72 years old, lived in a small house behind a shuttered diner. She let me in after making me stand on the porch long enough to prove I was alone. Her living room smelled like old fabric and coffee. Curtains closed. Bible on the end table. Framed photos turned face down on the mantel. She asked what I had learned. I told her about the names repeating. She said, "Good. Then you're not stupid." That was how she talked. No soft edges left. Ruth was born into one of the cemetery families and married into another. Her grandfather had been buried in the north section after what the papers called a farm accident. Her aunt told her the truth when she was 12. He had been held in a well house for 3 days while relatives argued over land deeds. By the time they finished with him, he was not worth saving. The family buried him at Black Ridge and inscribed the stone honestly because, in her aunt's words, lies only work above ground. I asked if these people believed the cemetery was cursed. She snorted. "Cursed is church language," she said. "They thought it was useful." Useful for what? For keeping accounts, for settling things, for holding what happened so it stayed where it belonged. She explained it as best she could, though I never knew how much she truly believed and how much she simply repeated what she had been told. The families at the center of Black Ridge had an old belief that certain violence made a person powerful after death, but not in a noble way. Ruined people carried hunger with them, fear, agony, rage, unfinished harm. If you buried enough of them together, especially on land prepared for it, the place became heavy with that force. Men who wanted to do terrible things came there because the place answered them, or steadied them, or took some of the cost. That was the idea. It sounded insane when I say it now. It sounded insane then too. But insanity held consistently over generations is hard to dismiss as mere eccentricity. It becomes a system. Ruth said there had always been caretakers, men chosen because they could stomach blood and keep their mouths shut. They were given access. They learned where the records were, which families still paid, which graves could be opened without attention. Most did not kill often. Some only handled bodies after the fact. A few, like Clyde, developed appetites of their own. Why keep doing it? I asked. Why not just let the place die? She looked at me a long time before answering. Because some people think what protects them is the same thing that feeds on them. Then she told me I should leave town for good. I said I had tried. She said I had not tried hard enough. A week later, she died in a house fire. The papers said a space heater tipped. The fire marshal called it accidental. I knew better before they even found the body because I had seen her kitchen. No space heater there. No extension cords. No clutter. She was careful in the rigid way some older people are careful after surviving too much. I drove out when I heard and watched the firefighters wet down the frame. An investigator I did not recognize kept everybody back. Toward evening, they carried out what was left of her in a black bag. The smell from the ruins brought back the line from one of the gravestones. Burned alive in the cellar. I started locking my doors then. Really locking them. Bracing chairs under knobs. Sleeping with a hammer nearby. Checking windows at night. I also bought a cheap shotgun off a man I knew from roofing jobs. No paperwork. No questions. The police again told me to call if I noticed anything suspicious. I almost laughed in the detective's face. Suspicious had become the atmosphere itself. I think what finally broke whatever restraint I had left was finding the grave of the woman from the basement. I did not know her name until the state released a list of identified victims. Her name was Dana Mercer, 36. Missing for 10 days before I found her. She had a sister in another county and 2 little boys. Her family did not bury her at Blackridge. Of course they did not. They buried her near home. But 3 weeks after the funeral, I found a new marker in the north section anyway. No fresh plot that I could tell. Just a dark granite stone set between older ones, as if it had always been there. Dana Mercer, 36. Shot while trying to flee. I stood in front of that stone until my vision blurred. That meant someone was still tending the accounts, still updating the list. Maybe not with bodies now, not under all the scrutiny, but with names. The cemetery was not a relic. It was active. I took a crowbar and pried the marker out of the ground. It was not deeply set. I rolled it downhill into a ditch and smashed my knuckles bloody doing it. Then I found another newer stone, and another, not all tied to Clyde. One for Del Harmon, one for Ruth Saylor, with the words kept conscious through the smoke. One for a local contractor who had died the previous year in what was called a hunting accident. I was so focused on the stones that I did not hear the truck until it reached the gate. Dark pickup. Same shape as the one I had noticed near my sister's house. 2 men got out, both in work clothes. One heavy, one lean. The heavy one carried bolt cutters, which made no sense since the gate was already hanging open. The lean one had something wrapped in a moving blanket. I ducked behind a monument and watched them walk toward the north section like they had every right. The lean man unwrapped the object. A headstone. They were carrying in a new headstone. Even now, after all the ugliness, that may be one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen. Not because of blood or screaming, because of how routine it looked. Men doing a task, measured steps, tools in hand, a practiced quiet. They set the stone near an open spot and began scraping away sod with flat shovels. I should have left. Instead, I circled through the older graves, keeping low, until I was close enough to hear. They were talking about measurements, not prayers, not threats. Measurements. The new stone lay face down at first. When they turned it over, I saw the name. Mine. My whole body went cold in one sick rush. My name, my age, and below it, opened the vault. It is hard to explain what that did to me. Violence can be resisted. A weapon can be taken or fired first. But seeing yourself already written into a place like that strips away the ordinary sequence of time. It tells you other people have moved you in their minds from living problem to settled dead. The heavy man straightened and rubbed his lower back. The lean one said they should have waited until night. The heavy one said the sooner the account was marked, the better. He said it like a rule. Then my foot broke a twig. It was small. In a normal place they would not have heard it. At Blackridge every sound seemed to carry. The lean one looked up. He said, "There." I ran. I cut through the old section, vaulted a low wall, and heard them coming after me. One shouted for me to stop. Another voice, farther off near the gate, answered. There had been a third man in the truck or on the road. I changed direction toward the welded vault, because the terrain there was rougher, and I knew it better. One shot cracked behind me. Stone chipped off a marker near my head. I dropped flat behind a family monument and shouldered the shotgun from the sling under my coat. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly fumbled the safety. The heavy man came around the far side at a trot with a pistol low by his thigh. I fired once, and the blast hit him in the chest hard enough to throw him backward into a stone angel. He did not get up. The lean man fired twice from cover, then moved left to flank me. I retreated toward the retaining wall, slipped on loose leaves, and tumbled down into the path by the sealed vault. My ankle twisted bad. Pain shot up the leg. The third man appeared at the top of the slope carrying a rifle. I fired at him and missed. He fired back, and the round hit the vault door with a metallic crack that rang through the trees. Then something happened I still cannot prove. The welded plate over the vault door bulged outward. Not much. An inch, maybe. Enough to pop one weld with a shriek. All three of us froze. The sound that followed was low and broad, like air forcing through a deep, wet space. Not a voice. Not exactly. But it had that shape. A human suffering stretched until it became mechanical. The lean man actually stepped back. The rifleman swore and looked toward the door instead of at me. A second weld popped. This is the point where anyone hearing the story decides whether they think I am lying or damaged. I do not care anymore. I know what I saw. Dark fluid began seeping from under the vault door. Not a flood. A slow ooze at first, black with a reddish sheen, carrying a smell that hit even from 10 feet away. Grave water, blood, chemicals, rot. Something burned. It spread over the concrete and into the dirt path. The rifleman gagged and backed up another step. The lean man said, "No," like he was speaking to a person inside. Then the door moved again. The remaining welds tore one after another. The steel plate fell outward and hit the ground. The iron door behind it opened several inches on its own. Cold air rolled out. The smell was so strong my eyes watered. It was the smell from the grave pit and the basement, and the exhumations and the fire and every bad place all combined into one concentrated breath. Something shifted in the dark behind the door. I do not mean a figure stepping forward, thank God. Nothing so clean. More like a mass settling. Wet cloth pulled over stone. Many small impacts inside one confined space. The same awful sense of too many bodies packed where bodies should not be. The lean man fired into the opening. 1 shot. 2. 3. The muzzle flashes lit shelves or wall edges inside, and in those flashes I saw hands, not attached in any orderly way. just hands. Pale, dark, ruined, some stripped to tendon, some bloated, some skeletal, layered and pressing from within the dark like things embedded in mud. The lean man screamed. A real one, high and involuntary. The rifleman ran. I wish I could tell you I was brave. I was not. I limped uphill as fast as my ankle allowed, shotgun in one hand, slipping in leaves, while behind me the lean man kept screaming and then changed to a choking cry that ended all at once. I did not look back until I reached the truck line by the gate. When I did, I saw only the open vault and the path below it. The heavy man still lay by the monument. The lean man was gone. Gone where, I cannot say. The black seep had spread farther downslope, threading between graves like runoff after hard rain. I got in my truck and drove straight to the sheriff's office in the next county because I no longer trusted my own. I gave them the whole story, including the part I knew made me sound insane. They sent deputies. They found the heavy man dead. They found blood, shell casings, the new headstone with my name on it, and drag marks near the vault door. They did not find the lean man or the rifleman. Inside the vault, according to the report I was eventually shown, there was evidence of extensive underground disturbance beneath the original structure, including collapsed voids connecting to older burial shafts not present on official maps. No mention of hands, no mention of fluid, just disturbance. The next month, the state finally did what should have been done years earlier. They condemned the entire north section, fenced off the cemetery, and announced a broad historical and criminal review. There were hearings. There were lawsuits. There were scholars and anthropologists and forensic teams. People talked about regional death customs, inherited violence, secret societies, corruption networks, burial fraud. All of that was true in parts. None of it got close enough. Because the thing about Black Ridge was never only the crimes. It was the appetite behind them. The steady conviction that agony could be collected and arranged and used. That if enough terrible endings were packed into one patch of ground, the ground itself would become a tool. I left town after that for real. New state. New name on some paperwork, though not all. I found work where nobody asked too much. Years have passed now. I do not give interviews. I do not read articles about it anymore. Every now and then, somebody online rediscovers the case and turns it into entertainment. They post aerial shots of the cemetery and speculate about tunnels and cults and occult carvings. They use phrases like haunted ground because they need the distance of folklore. They do not want the plain truth. The plain truth is uglier. People did those things. Men with mortgages and uniforms and church clothes and county titles. Men who ate breakfast and paid taxes and knew how to smile at funerals. They found a place already thick with old brutality and decided that instead of recoiling from it, they could build with it. They used the cemetery the way some men use ledgers, keeping a running account of pain. When they killed, they wrote it down. When others killed, they corrected the record. The dead were not honored there. They were sorted. I still wake some nights with dirt in my nose that is not there. I still dream of the grave opening and that coffin breaking under my hand. Sometimes I hear Dana Mercer dragging over the stones before the shot took her. Sometimes I hear Ruth Saylor saying cursed is church language. Sometimes I am back at the vault, reading my own name on the new stone. And I cannot move because some part of me believes the stone makes the death inevitable. And once in a while, though less often now, I dream what lay beyond the iron door after the welds gave way. In the dream, I do look inside properly, not because I want to, because the dream will not let me turn away. The room beyond is bigger than the hill could contain. The walls are made of grave faces set close together, mouths packed with soil, eyes open under layers of root and lime. Shelves made from coffin lids bow under the weight of limbs and bags and jawbones. Water drips from above, but what falls is not water by the time it lands. It is black and thick and full of hair. The floor moves as if breathing because it is built from people laid down one over another without enough dirt between them to turn separate. Every place where a body ended badly leaves some piece of itself exposed. A kneecap, a braid, a row of teeth, a child's shoe, burned fingers, a rib cage sawn open. The room is full but still making space. And there are voices, though never words I can keep after waking. Not ghosts, not really. More like the sound that remains after enough human panic gets trapped somewhere and cannot die cleanly. I know dreams are dreams. I know trauma reuses old material and gives it masks. I know the mind tries to shape horror into forms it can revisit safely. I know all that. But I also know one more thing. Last year, despite every promise I made myself, I drove back near the county on a work trip and took the long road past Black Ridge just to prove it was over. The fence was new, 8 feet high with privacy slats and warning signs, state property, no trespassing. Trees had been cut back around the perimeter, cameras on poles. The gate was chained. From the road, you could barely see the tops of monuments through the slats. I should have kept driving. Instead, I pulled onto the shoulder and got out. Evening, cold, sky going gray. No traffic. The place made almost no sound. Then I saw fresh flowers hooked through the fence. Not on the public side near the gate. Farther down, at the line where the north section would have been if you traced the rise. White lilies and red carnations tied together with twine. There was a card tucked in the stems. I reached through the slats and pulled it loose. No envelope. Just a folded piece of heavy paper. Inside, in neat block letters, it said, "The account is never closed. No signature." On the back was a list of 3 names. One was mine. The other 2 belonged to men I had never heard of. I got in my truck and drove until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the wheel straight. I told nobody for months because I was tired of being the man with the story. Eventually, I ran the other names through public records and news archives. Both were dead. One had disappeared after leaving a bar outside Knoxville. His body turned up in a retention pond with both knees shattered. The other died in a garage fire ruled accidental. There was almost no coverage beyond the local reports. I do not know whether the note was a threat, a record, or an invitation. I know only that somebody still visits that fence. Somebody still thinks in accounts. And sometimes, when the weather turns warm after rain, and the ground smell rises from the ditches, I remember the first day at Black Ridge, before I knew anything, when I stood in the north section, reading those plain little lines on the stones. Taken in pieces, burned alive in the cellar, found in the creek with the hands removed. At the time, I thought the horror was in the wording. I was wrong. The horror was that whoever wrote those lines was not trying to frighten anyone. They were being exact. They were preserving facts the way careful people preserve deeds or family recipes or baptism dates. Because in that place the manner of suffering mattered more than the life attached to it. A name could be switched, a body could be moved, records could burn, deputies could retire, judges could die. But if the ending was bad enough, Blackridge wanted it written down. That is what makes me think it was never only about hiding crimes. It was about collecting them, about building a cemetery where the dead had all gone through the worst hands imaginable, and laying them shoulder to shoulder until the ground itself learned the pattern. There are places where you feel grief, places where you feel history, places where you feel how small you are. Blackridge felt hungry. And the worst part is this: hunger is not the same as haunting. A haunting is what remains. Hunger is what waits.